Imagine standing in a crowded room, surrounded by voices layering over each other like static. Your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, and all you can think about is the quiet of your car waiting outside. To most people, this is just a party. To you, it's sensory assault. But here's what most never understand. Your aversion to crowds isn't social anxiety. It's not fear of judgment or lack of confidence. It's something deeper. Something rooted in how your nervous system processes the world. Schopenhauer once observed that some minds are built for depth, not breadth. They don't thrive in the shallow churn of group energy. They need space to think, to feel, to exist without performing. And if you've ever felt relief when plans were cancelled, or secretly loved the empty streets during lockdown, or needed a code word to escape family gatherings you genuinely care about, you're not broken. You're protecting something most people don't even know they're losing. Stay with me, because what comes next will make everything clearer. There's a moment that happens in crowded spaces that most people never consciously register. The air thickens. The noise becomes texture. Your body starts tracking exits, not because you're afraid of the people, but because your nervous system is doing math, calculating how much energy this room will cost you and whether you have enough left to make it through. For decades, you've probably heard the same explanations. You're just shy. You need to get out more. It's all in your head. But none of those ever felt true, did they? Because this isn't about confidence. It's not about social skills or practice or exposure therapy. It's about something far more fundamental, the way your body experiences density. Let me tell you something I've learned after years of watching people describe this exact feeling. They don't say, "I'm scared of crowds." They say, "Crowds are exhausting." That word, exhausting, is critical because it reveals what's really happening. This isn't fear, it's depletion. Your nervous system isn't overreacting. It's protecting a finite resource, your energy. And in a crowded room, that energy drains faster than most people can imagine. There's a biological reason for this. When you're surrounded by people, your brain doesn't just process faces. It processes micro-expressions, tone shifts, body language, spatial proximity, conversational rhythm. Every single input is data. And for someone with a nervous system wired for careful observation, someone who notices things others miss, a crowd isn't just overwhelming. It's information overload disguised as socializing. Your brain is trying to track 50 different threads at once. Who's speaking? Who's listening? Who's about to interrupt? Who needs acknowledgement? Who's waiting for you to respond? And all of that happens beneath conscious awareness. You're not choosing to do it. Your nervous system is doing it automatically. And it's exhausting. Think about the last time you were in a packed space. Maybe it was a family gathering, a work event, a grocery store on a Saturday afternoon. You didn't panic. You didn't run. You stayed. You smiled. You performed the social script. But inside, something was counting down. 2 hours, 1 hour, 30 minutes. And when you finally got back to your car, or your home, or even just a quiet hallway, you exhaled. Not because the danger passed, but because the noise finally stopped. That exhale isn't relief from fear, it's relief from labor. Because being in a crowd, for you, is work. And here's the part most people never understand. It's not just physical work, it's emotional work, it's cognitive work. It's the work of holding yourself together in a space that feels like it's pulling you apart. Here's where the psychology becomes unmistakable. Crowds aren't just groups of people. They're sensory overload disguised as social interaction. Every voice is a frequency. Every movement is data. Every face is a micro-expression your brain tries to decode. And for someone with a nervous system wired for depth, someone who processes the world carefully, slowly, thoroughly, a crowd isn't a gathering. It's chaos pretending to be connection. Schopenhauer understood this instinctively. He wrote about the porcupine dilemma. the way people need warmth from each other, but can't get too close without pain. But for you, the dilemma isn't closeness, it's volume. You don't need distance from one person, you need distance from 50. Because 50 people means 50 energies, 50 expectations, 50 performances you're expected to deliver simultaneously. And no one ever taught you how to say, I don't have that much of myself to give. So you give it anyway. You smile, you nod, you laugh at the right moments, you ask the right questions, you perform the role of person who is enjoying this. And by the time you leave, you're empty. Pay attention to this part, because there's a second layer here that most people miss. It's not just the sensory overload, it's the performance. In a crowd, you're not just present, you're on. You're managing your face, your tone, your body language, the speed of your responses. You're doing what one person in the comments called 50 fake and passive conversations in a night, and every single one of them costs energy. Not because you're bad at socializing, but because socializing for you is work. It's a second job you didn't apply for, with no pay and no breaks. And after decades of doing it, after years of weddings and reunions and networking events and dinners where you smiled until your face hurt, you finally realized something most people never admit out loud. You don't want to do it anymore. Not because you hate people, but because you've learned the difference between connection and performance. And crowds only ever ask for the second one. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because society has a very specific script for what this means. If you don't like crowds, you must be antisocial, depressed, traumatized, broken in some fundamental way. But none of those fit, do they? Because you're not avoiding people out of fear. You're avoiding crowds out of clarity. You've learned, through decades of lived experience, that your peace is more valuable than your presence. And that's not a flaw, that's wisdom. Schopenhauer would call this the difference between living deliberately and living reactively. Most people move through crowds because that's what's expected. You've stopped doing that, not out of rebellion, out of self-preservation, because you've finally realized the cost of showing up is higher than the cost of staying home. Come closer for a moment. If you've spent years feeling guilty about this, if you forced yourself into rooms you didn't want to be in just to prove you were normal, if you've ever felt relief when someone cancelled plans and then immediately felt shame for feeling relieved, listen carefully. You're not broken. Your nervous system isn't defective. You're not missing some crucial piece of social wiring. What you are is honest. You've stopped pretending that crowds give you energy when they clearly drain it. You've stopped performing enthusiasm for spaces that make you feel like you're suffocating. And you've started protecting something most people lose without ever noticing: your inner quiet. That quiet isn't emptiness, it's clarity. It's the space where you can finally hear your own thoughts without someone else's voice drowning them out. It's the space where you remember who you are when you're not performing for anyone. This quiet shift is happening all over the world. People who spent decades trying to fit into loud, crowded, performative spaces are finally stepping back, not out of bitterness, not out of defeat, out of self-preservation. If this resonates, you're not alone. This is a quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections. Before we continue, consider joining this space. Share in the comments what part of this hit closest to home, because what comes next is where everything starts to make sense. Let's talk about what happened during the pandemic, because something fascinating emerged in the comments of videos like this one. Person after person admitted, almost sheepishly, I loved lockdown. I loved the empty roads. Being paid to sit at home away from people was great. And then, almost immediately, they added, is that wrong? Do you see what's happening there? They felt relief, deep, genuine, physical relief, when the world stopped demanding their presence. And then, they felt guilt for feeling relieved, because society told them that isolation was supposed to be suffering. That loneliness was supposed to be unbearable. But for you, it wasn't. It was oxygen. For the first time in years, maybe decades, you could breathe without performing. You could exist without explaining yourself. You could be home without guilt. And that feeling, that deep, quiet relief, revealed something you'd been ignoring for years. You were never meant to live that way. Here's the truth. Most people will never understand. For someone who feels drained by crowds, lockdown wasn't a prison. It was permission. Permission to stay home without explaining yourself. Permission to skip events without being called antisocial. Permission to finally live the way your nervous system has been begging you to live for years. And when the world started opening back up, you didn't feel excited. You felt dread because you knew what was coming. The return of expectations, the return of performances, the return of rooms full of people who would drain you dry and then ask why you left early. The return of having to justify why you'd rather be home than at a party, why you'd rather read than network, why you'd rather sit in silence than make small talk. And for the first time you realized you don't want to go back. But here's where we need to be careful, because there's a line between solitude and isolation, and it's easy to cross without realizing it. Solitude is chosen. Isolation is imposed by fear, by bitterness, by the belief that no one could ever understand you. Solitude is restorative. Isolation is corrosive. And the difference isn't always obvious from the inside. So let me ask you directly. Do you feel peace when you're alone? Or do you feel numb? Do you feel relief when plans cancel? Or do you feel nothing? Because if the answer is numbness, if you've stopped feeling much of anything at all, then this isn't about safeguarding your emotional world anymore. It's about something else. And that's worth paying attention to. Solitude should feel like coming home. Isolation feels like being locked out. One of the most telling comments I saw said this: "Family gatherings are the same thing. I'm fine for maybe 2 hours. Then I start getting nervous. My husband and I have codes to say it's time to go. I love my family and friends, and I can text all day, but to be in person with all the emotions, it drains me." Read that again. I love my family, but to be in person with all the emotions, it drains me. This is the paradox no one talks about. You can love someone deeply and still need to escape them after 2 hours. You can care about people genuinely and still find their presence exhausting. This isn't coldness. This isn't detachment. This is honesty about how your nervous system works. And here's what makes it even more complex. It's not about the people themselves. It's about the energy required to be present with them in a group setting. One-on-one, you're fine. You can talk for hours. But add 3 more people to the room, and suddenly you're tracking 4 different conversational threads, 4 different emotional states, 4 different expectations of you. And that's when the countdown starts. And here's what Schopenhauer would say about that. Some people are built for breadth. They thrive in wide, shallow networks. They collect acquaintances like stamps. Others are built for depth. They need fewer connections, but those connections have to mean something. And for people built for depth, a crowd isn't just tiring. It's meaningless, because you're not connecting with anyone. You're performing for everyone. And after decades of performing, you've finally realized you'd rather have one real conversation at 3 a.m. than 50 fake ones at a party. You'd rather sit in silence with someone who understands you than fill the air with words that mean nothing. Because silence for you isn't awkward. It's honest. There's something else happening beneath all of this. Something quieter. Something most people never name. When you're in a crowd, you're not just managing other people's energy. You're managing their expectations of you. You're reading the room, adjusting your tone, matching their pace, laughing at the right moments, nodding at the right times. You're becoming a mirror. And mirrors don't have their own reflection. After a while, you start to forget what your own face looks like. You start to lose track of what you actually think, feel, want. And when you finally get home, when you close the door and the silence wraps around you like a blanket, you're not just relieved. You're returning. Returning to yourself. To the person you were before you had to perform. To the clarity that gets buried under all that noise. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he talked about the need for solitude. It wasn't about hating people. It was about preserving the self. Because in a world that demands constant performance, constant availability, constant presence, solitude becomes the only space where you can still hear your own voice. And for you, that voice matters more than applause. It matters more than being liked, more than being invited, more than being seen as normal. Because you've learned something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. That the only person you truly need to be at peace with is yourself. What most people never notice is that this preference isn't new. It didn't start last year. It didn't start during the pandemic. It started the first time you walked into a room full of people and felt your chest tighten. The first time you realized that what everyone else called fun felt like work to you. Maybe you were a child at a birthday party, watching from the corner. Maybe you were a teenager at a school dance, counting the minutes until you could leave. Maybe you were an adult at a wedding, smiling through the exhaustion. But the feeling was always the same. I don't belong here, and I don't want to pretend anymore. And for years, you thought that feeling was a problem, something to fix, something to overcome. But what if it wasn't? What if it was just information? Information about who you are, what you need, and how you're built to move through the world. What if the problem wasn't you? What if the problem was a world that never made space for people like you? And here's the part that requires real courage. Admitting that out loud. Not just to yourself, but to the people who expect you to show up. Because the world doesn't make space for people like you. The world rewards extroversion. It celebrates the loud, the social, the constantly available. And if you're not those things, you're told something is wrong with you. That you need to change. That you need to try harder. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is a world that mistakes noise for connection and performance for presence? What if the problem is a culture that values quantity over quality, breadth over depth, appearance over authenticity? So what does this mean for your life going forward? It means you stop apologizing. You stop forcing yourself into rooms that drain you just to prove you're normal. You stop feeling guilty when you'd rather stay home than go to a wedding, a reunion, a networking event, a dinner party, because your peace isn't negotiable, and anyone who truly cares about you will understand that. It means you start being honest about what you need. Not passive, not avoidant, honest. If you need to leave after 2 hours, say so. If you need a day alone after a social event, take it. If you need to skip something entirely, skip it. Because the alternative, pretending you're fine when you're not, doesn't protect anyone. It just drains you faster. And after years of pretending, you've earned the right to stop. There's a kind of honesty that only comes with age. It's the honesty of someone who's tried everything else and finally realized the only thing that works is the truth. The truth that you don't thrive in crowds. The truth that your energy is finite. The truth that your peace is more valuable than your presence. And the truth that you're not going to apologize for it anymore. Because you've spent enough years apologizing, enough years explaining, enough years trying to convince people that you're not broken, just different. And now, finally, you're done. Not out of bitterness, not out of defeat, out of clarity. Because you finally learned what Schopenhauer knew all along, that some people are built for solitude. And that's not a curse, it's a gift. Let me speak directly to you. There's a kind of person who walks through life like they're carrying a secret. Not a dark secret, a quiet one. The secret is this. They've learned that their energy is finite, that their peace is precious, that their solitude is not a lack, it's a sanctuary. And they've stopped apologizing for it. If you're reading this, you might be that person, or you might be becoming that person. Either way, this isn't something you need to fix. You're just finally being honest about what you've known for years. Crowds drain you, quiet restores you, and that's not a weakness, it's wisdom. But here's the question. No one asks, What happens when the solitude you've been protecting starts to feel less like peace and more like emptiness? When the quiet you craved becomes the silence you can't escape? There's a line between choosing to be alone and being unable to be anything else. And crossing that line changes everything. We'll talk about that next. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.